At the start of a new academic year, more than 1 million students return to the city's 1,100 public schools. Many of them are decrepit 19th century buildings, complete with coal-burning furnaces. A recent study shows that the students are being shortchanged, too, on education. I'm David R. Jones, president of the Community Service Society of New York and host of the Urban Agenda. Joining me to discuss what faces school children is Dr. Irving Hamer, Jr., the newest member of the Board of Education, appointed by Manhattan Borough President C. Virginia Fields. Dr. Hamer has a distinguished history in the field of education, having served both in government and in private posts. Welcome, Dr. Hamer.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here this morning.
A recent report by the New York City Partnership indicated that employers are looking for an educated workforce, and I'm afraid that they don't see the public school as providing that.
Right.
What's your view of that kind of report?
Well, I think the report is not discerning. It's not carefully crafted. I think it's much too general in its assault. In fact, what I think we have in New York City is two systems. I think a real careful, discerning, careful look at what's going on in the public education city of New York would reveal that there's some 14 districts in the city that don't deliver a high-quality education, and there are certain high schools that don't. But if you look at the other side of the ledger, there are a bunch of schools that do terrific jobs, and both at the high school and at the elementary and middle school level as well.
So this kind of report sort of skews the whole reality of the school system, in your view.
Well, it really does. I mean, it doesn't really tell the real picture. The real picture is that we have two systems. One that really works, delivers what I would consider to be a world-class educational experience for some children, some districts, and some high schools.
Right.
And in other districts and other high schools, you know, they're at the bottom of the barrel. There's no question about that. The system is failing. But it's really two systems. And I think you can't really seek remedies, you can't really craft a meaningful attack unless you're really clear about what the problem is. And I think that the report by the partnership was too generalized. And what we need is the partnership to get on board to get those schools and those school districts that are not performing up to snuff.
Well, my organization, the Community Service Society, just released a report in conjunction with Gary Natriello of the Columbia University, which seems to indicate that the new Regents standards that are going to be imposed over the next 4 or 5 years has a real problem if there are not new resources and new skills going in for kids.
Well, I think the report is probably quite right. I think that we are looking at a kind of Armageddon if we don't, in fact, figure out a way to restructure our organizations, focus our resources on those schools and school districts that don't have a shot at really passing the Regents. There are some schools and school districts that are not concerned. They have pretty good pass rates as they stand. But I mean, I can name the schools, right? There are a bunch of schools that don't have any students passing, or very small numbers of students.
What about in pure numbers? We've got more than 1 million children.
Right.
How many high school students are there?
Well, yeah, at least 400,000.
And of those, you know, who's at risk? I mean, are we talking about 10% of the children will pass easily, or are we talking about 40%? How does this work?
I'm not sure I know the numbers, but the overwhelming majority of the children in high schools are not passing the Regents.
Right.
I would say the overwhelming majority of the children.
And what do you see as the major problem here? The Regents standards, obviously, I think they're only 35% of the children who come out with the Regents diploma now. At the moment, I know the Regents is going to require biology exams, higher mathematics, you know, advanced English, writing, things that obviously, history. Where would you focus as a new member of the board? How are we going to make sure these kids make it?
Let me just say one thing about the new Regent standards, which I think is hugely very exciting, and I think it's important for your viewers to get the excitement about the standard, right? Because we have a whole century of having a tracked system that is absolutely, unambiguously, politically saying that there are certain, politically and educationally saying that there were certain children that didn't warrant, you know, a high-quality, competitive educational experience.
Right.
And so the whole century we've been like this. What has happened in relatively recent times is that the state has said, oh, wait, all bets are off. We're going to restructure this. Everybody's going to have access to exactly the same educational experience and the same standard for completing high school experience. I think it's revolutionary. I think it's totally a breath of fresh air. And so there is a huge excitement in me about that as a possibility. We, of course, are now confronted by the challenge of meeting the new standard, because for the whole century, huge numbers of children have not had access to the opportunity to take higher level mathematics
right.
or to take real serious biology or chemistry. So we're now saying everybody's going to get a shot at this, and we have a chance once and for all in this state, in this city, to demonstrate that all children have the capacity to learn and do it. Right? I think that's just a big, big news, right? I think it's a big story. I think it's very exciting. And it's, in one way, a kind of manifestation of Brown, right? You can go back to Brown in '54.
Right.
This is what folks were trying to get to, right? Now, we have the problem of delivering on it, right? Where do we get the cash? How do we reconfigure the schools? How do we properly staff them? How do we make sure that the teachers themselves know the algebra? How do we make sure the teachers themselves can write and do the biology? Because for a long time, we've not required that they do that, because we had this whole section of students that we didn't think warranted a high-quality, competitive educational experience, so there was no need to reconfigure the resources. There was no reason to ensure that we had teachers that could write themselves, right, and do biology and do the algebra. So now we have what I think is another 5 years of real, 5, maybe 10 years of a real struggle to reorganize the system.
And you alluded to it. This isn't only a New York City or New York State problem. I think the president of Boston University, I believe, just came out with a statement talking about Massachusetts, saying that if the basic exams that some of the kids were supposed to take were actually given to some of the teachers in Boston, they couldn't pass it either. What are we going to do about this as a nation now?
Well,
no one seems to want to invest.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting thing, David Jones. I think these are hugely exciting, very radical, very revolutionary times. The nation and the city, the state, is coming to grips with the need to educate all the children in the way that we've been educating some of the children for a long time. And I think it's really relatively brand new. I mean, I think we're right to have a certain amount of angst about it. I think we're right to be uncomfortable about it. I think we're right to sort of do analyses that say the resources are not in place to deliver on it. But the battleship is changing direction, if you will, right? If you think of it as a battleship or a great big cruise liner that has to change direction, it has changed. I mean, we've gotten now in law, we've got in-state regulation, something to really begin to shoot for that's meaningful. And we all have to get in this boat together, right? Private sector, you know, we don't need them beating up on us. That we need them to help us figure out how to get the resources, whether we're changing tax bases, whether we're changing funding allocations. What do we have to do in order to deliver on this commitment?
Of course, changing tax base, for the viewers who don't know, obviously, we are, I guess, perhaps the sole industrial country which bases its decisions on public education expenditures on local property taxes.
Right.
There's no national plan
Right.
For equity in education. As a matter of fact, I think Thurgood Marshall, in one of his greatest dissents, talked about a missed opportunity in the United States Supreme Court for not making public education a constitutionally protected entitlement. But going on that, I think, what do you say to advocates who are representing poor people that we support standards as well, but if they don't come up with the resources, we actually may be in worse shape than we are in today?
Right. Yeah. No. I think it's very right. I mean, I think there is a history of resources not being equitably distributed, and I think poor communities of color, have been the victims of the sort of kind of discretionary distribution of adequate resources. But I'm encouraged, David. I mean, I think this is a really interesting time to be up in this game. I'm encouraged by the new body of language that's showing up that, you know, that sort of gives us a handle for the first time in the history of this state to look to the courts for remedial relief. So when someone starts using language like evidence of persistent educational failure, we can begin to document clearly that there is persistent educational failure, and we can seek relief in the courts. So I think that the state needs to really rethink about its funding strategy now that there's some consensus that what we can't tolerate any longer is persistent educational failure. So you talked to me about low-income communities of color that have not been cutting the mustard, not been getting a fair deal. I will tell you a story that's 30 years old, 40 years old. I mean, it's not like a new story, right? So when the partnership comes out and says the system is not performing, I critique them and say, you're not discerning. I want them to acknowledge that for 30 years, 35 years in some communities, this pattern of non-performance and non-success, non-equitable distribution of resources has been prevalent. And folks have been saying it for a very long time. Now, right, I think the opportunity exists for communities, and I want all your listeners to get this. I think all communities have a shot to seek relief in the courts, because we're now saying this society, this state, will no longer tolerate persistent educational failure. Something needs to happen to the way funds are distributed. Something needs to happen to the educational so-called professionals that are not delivering on it. So you cannot have a protected job. You cannot stay in a building all the time, right, if the pattern of failure is persistent. And we can demonstrate that, right? You know, you give me 5 years of non-performance at grade level, that's persistent educational failure. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to define it, right?
It's also interesting, I think, in supporting what you say, that this very notion of the new Regents standard also gives an opportunity for the city to line up with other constituencies.
Right.
Clearly, the rural areas of New York State, it doesn't take much to see how similar their pass rates, right, for Regents standards are. They're obviously going to be hit very definitely, right, if they can't get their kids properly trained.
That's right.
Though I must admit, when our report was issued, I was tremendously shocked that, for instance, the number of high schools without even lab facilities, the capital expenditure, right, and the rest. Let's talk about the kinds of conditions you meet in the schools. Obviously, a young child or an adolescent was killed recently when a contractor was repairing a school building. There's a sense that we have a very decrepit infrastructure. What is the board doing about that now?
Well, this is a crisis. This is a crisis. This is a crisis of immense proportions. I'm sorry to sort of say to you that I now know that the death of this young person was predicted. I mean, folks were able to tell that parapets and bricks and other parts of facades were in disrepair, and that unless something was done immediately, someone was going to be seriously injured and or killed. I mean, so there are reports and analyses that sort of established, right, that this was a huge possibility, which makes it even more sad that nothing has happened. I think that this is a very complicated issue, but I don't think we have any options here. I think that everyone needs to be in the same boat together. That is, the state has a huge culpability here. Its state aid for buildings has been woefully lacking. The city itself is just beginning to get into the business of ending a deferred maintenance program on buildings. It's been doing that since the mid-'70s, maybe even a little bit before. So you go all the way back to the fiscal crisis. We get into a pattern of deferred maintenance. And, you know, the death of this young person is a consequence of that kind of deferred maintenance. I think the system itself, that is the Board of Education, the School Construction Authority, the buildings, the facilities department at the Board of Education, all have to do a hugely better job at managing existing resources and trying to figure out how to leverage existing resources to create new resources and to get more mileage out of those dollars. The board has, for the first time, I think, in anyone's memory, just completed a building-by-building analysis of every building in the city, right? I mean, a real physical analysis by either an architect or an engineer, not someone eyeballing the building. So what you report to me today, what other people see when they walk into the building, are the decrepit conditions. Right. What you don't see is what's behind the walls, right? Yeah. You don't see the crumbling steel infrastructure. You don't see the bricks pulling away from the building, because unless you're a really trained architect or engineer. The system has now done this building by building, and is in the process of constructing an analysis of what is going to be needed to get the system back in place. A few years ago, folks told us it was going to cost us $25 billion to get it done. $25 billion to get it done. That was a few years ago. We're now 2 or 3 years later. Each month that goes by, the cost goes up. The costs go up. And I think it's going to take a mix of strategies, some integration of business practices with respect to leveraging dollars and selling air rights or getting other people to take ownership of property so they can get benefits from owning the property and using the results of those tax benefits to do. I mean, I think there are a whole host of strategies that are available that have not been thought about in the past, that in order for us to get our arms around the magnitude of this problem, we're going to have to employ. But it's going to take everybody in the boat together. Again, this is not a state-city thing. It's not a public-private piece. It's not a, business-as-usual sort of agenda. real new, different kinds of strategies, right?
You just said everyone in the same boat. The public education, and certainly in the city, hasn't really exhibited many signs of that, at least in the past decade or so.
Right.
We've had everything from fights over condom distribution to issues of police in the schools, very little about educational excellence.
That's true.
What makes you think we're going to see a change now?
Well, I think there's some watershed events that have happened. I think there's new legislation, right? The regions, the persistent educational failure. So, I mean, there is a handle now. I mean, the courts can get up in this in a serious way. I think the region's requirement, right? I think if I was a real estate owner that owns some property on Park Avenue, I'd want this to get fixed because, you know, all of my lifetimes of work and sometimes my family's work is connected with the property values of the city. That is intrinsically tied to what happens with respect to public education, right? Can't separate the two, right? So, I mean, I think there are new constituencies coming up to the plate, coming to the table to try to figure out how to get this done. And I think there are new challenges, new confrontations, right? I think when the partnership comes out with a report that says we're not getting our people, you know, they're starting to get the message. Now, the question is whether they're going to be prepared to step up, participate, and help do the remedy, or whether they're just going to stand on the sideline and kick dirt in the face of the board.
In cocktail parties all across the city and probably the state, you know, you find people again and again saying, well, what we need is, you know, the parochial schools should take this over.
Oh,
or
please.
The charter schools. How do we respond to that? I mean, I'm sure some of your viewers feel the same way.
Well,
and our viewers feel the same way.
I'm sorry for sort of exclaiming in such an inappropriate way, but, you know, I mean, we're talking 1,000,001 children, right? This is not going to happen in parochial schools. I mean, even if we did have a voucher, they don't have the capacity to even do 2% of the students in the school. Charters, I'll take 5. It's not going to change it. The numbers are such that we absolutely are dependent upon fixing the existing system in order to accommodate the 1.1 million children. In 2 years, it's going to be 1,000,004. What are we talking about? We need to get very serious here. And I mean, I'm not an advocate or proponent of vouchers. I have some interest in charters. I think they're interesting innovation. I do not think they are a remedy to the overwhelming majority of children who have a requirement for high-quality public education. It's absolutely not. The numbers don't support the approach at all.
What do you think's behind this sort of angst? Why people seem to want the quick fix here? And I assume we could take charters and vouchers as a kind of quick fix. Nothing. You don't have to pay more money. You basically can get your own child out of the way out of harm's way.
Well, you know, I think of it as I mean, I don't really know why people want the quick fix. I mean, I don't know why people are not a lot more discerning about what it would take to really create a totally brand new system for 1,000,004 children. I mean, that's what's coming. 1,000,004 children, 2 or 3 years is what we'll be educating in the city of New York. And, you know, the Catholic Church, the yeshiva schools, the independent school community, there's not enough Daltons, not enough Trinities in this city to even begin to think about taking on serious numbers here.
But I think we have to recognize one of the reasons that this has become attractive is the composition of the kids being educated. I mean, the fact that 80 to 90%.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Right. I mean, but maybe there's a race thing here, right? I mean, you know, I mean, I'm prepared to sort of acknowledge that there may be a racial sort of problem here, and that you know, the system would like to sort of cream you know, the high ability sort of black and Latino, Asian American children in the city, get them into sort of preferred parochial or independent school situations, and then let the system continue to decline. Well, I mean, anyone who thinks that is mistaken. I'm telling you, if I own a piece of real estate on Park Avenue or on Fifth Avenue, I'd want this fixed just from the point of view of my real estate. If I were Travelers or if I were AT&T, I'd want this fixed because the cost of relocating and reconstructing a new reality for myself is prohibitive. If I were at Wall Street and I had, you know, I mean, there's a real vested interest.
But where are the political leadership here? I haven't heard what you're saying from one significant political leader, liberal or conservative.
Right.
Where are they?
I'm not sure. I mean, I really think that they're running behind the curve here, right? I mean, I think the reason we're in this position is because political leadership has been running behind the curve. I don't think it's very sophisticated in its understanding of what's going to be required here. I don't think that I mean, I think there's a lot of rhetoric You know, I mean, I could turn on the tube right now and I could hear, you know, men running for Congress, right, saying that they want to be the educational congressman. None of them are talking about the infrastructure, right, and what it's going to take to get that done. None of them have engineered a conversation with the critical players to start thinking about what it's going to take. So I see no statesmanship here yet. You know, I don't know whether I have the capacity to use my pulpit to help clarify what needs to be done and who needs to play and how they need to participate. But I hope to do that. Right? But I don't think there are a lot of people out there who really have their arms around it.
Now, there is attempts at innovation going on. As a matter of fact, Chancellor's crew has a program called Innovative Schools. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you...
Well, I mean, it's I want to keep saying it's a hugely exciting time, right? There are 110 brand new schools in the city of New York. He's just appointed a new executive at the Board of Education to be responsible for creating a cadre of whole new schools, you know. Very exciting, very interesting, you know, because we're talking about a new generation of schools, mostly small, mostly intense, mostly academically oriented. We have the problem in the city of not being able to build a whole lot of new schools in the way we built them in the 1920s, right? I mean, we're not going to build another 4,000 student school. There is no space to do that. But even the educational efficacy of that kind of building, you know, is in question nowadays. I mean, but you give me a school of 500 or 600 children, 800 children, 400 children, the things that can be done are really quite amazing, A, and B, it's scalable. I mean, you can really work it in a city like this one. So that's hugely very exciting. I mean, there are a bunch of very exciting initiatives that are going on, but you're totally right. We need a big conversation on the character and content of the instructional experience that is happening inside the school system. We need to rework this infrastructure because it's going to fall down. It is going to fall down. I mean, it has fallen down. People have now been hurt and killed as a consequence of the infrastructure. It has to be worked on, right? And so I think this chancellor, first of all, has a bunch of tenure that no other chancellor's had in a long time. I mean, we've had
revolving door.
We've had a revolving door without chancellor. This guy has made at least a workable relationship with the mayor. So the City Hall is spending money on education in a way that has not spent money before. After a series of cuts, right? I mean, big cuts, years and years and years of cutting. This chancellor comes in, for whatever reason, however he managed to do it, he ponies up, crafts a relationship with City Hall. Money is starting to flow in interesting and important ways.
What about the effort to reduce class size, particularly kindergarten to third grade?
It's a fabulous initiative. Again, it's like the Regent Standard. You know, I mean, I've had the kind of professional life that's made it possible for me and maybe some of your viewers to purchase a pre-K experience for, you know, for a child. I mean, anyone, any place in the world who had the capacity to do this would do it. Right. Anyone in this city who had the capacity to do it would purchase a pre-K experience. We now have a set of reforms that say every 4-year older needs to be in school, right? We start the 4-year-old pre-K experience this year. And next year, the board is going to start an initiative to reduce class size. Well, great, fabulous things. The challenges are, where's the infrastructure? Where's the space? Who's going to take, where are the teachers coming from to do this? What are the materials and supplies to support this initiative? These are now the discussions that go along with these innovations, but it's a hugely interesting, very powerful sort of set of initiatives that folks are now beginning to sort of say, we must do this if we want the outcome to be positive and proactive and credible. But there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done, right? You can't just say, reduce class size, right? That reduction in class size means more space, more classrooms, more teachers, right? More supplies and materials for children, all of which costs. And so there are a bunch of things that have to be done in order to make that possible.
As a board member, did you hear anyone talking, obviously CUNY has come under enormous scrutiny recently over the remediation thing. And basically, at least until the court stopped it recently, there was an effort to do away with remediation at CUNY, with discussion being they should have gotten that in high school.
Right.
Did any of those politicians who were talking about doing away with remediation talk about intensifying the educational experience in high school?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think these are. I mean, one of the regrets that I have about education, certainly in the city of New York, and maybe in the state of New York, but certainly in the city, is the penetration of the firewall between education and politics. There's always been some politics, so the wall has been permeable. But, you know, you sort of get the feeling that the wall is down now. You know, we have elected officials making education policy, right? Say, end remediation, put cops in schools, you know, end social promotion. These are people who've not taught, they have not administered, you know, I don't want to beat up on lawyers, but they're lawyers and they're business people, and you know, there are a whole bunch of folks who have their own sets of experiences, and they think that their experiences are the best thing for children today and going forward. I don't happen to think that is the case. You know, I mean, I think people jumped on the ending remediation as a political sort of way to do it, and didn't really think about the implications of it. I mean, I'll just say one thing about remediation at the college level, right? I mean, you know, I took calculus, and I needed remediation, right? I mean, I find it hard to think that someone can get through a college experience without some kind of tutorial, remedial sets of experiences. Whether it's at the high end or the low end, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, we get it, we use it, and we go forward, right? To make it a
litmus test.
A litmus test for access is sort of silly.
Just in closing, what do you see your tenure on the board? What would you hope to achieve?
Well, I've crafted two primary agendas for myself, which I hope to be held accountable for. Very straightforward and simple. I said at the top of the show, the problem with the partnerships report is it's not discerning. We have a pattern of low performance in certain schools and certain districts. I've said to myself, to this chancellor, and to my colleagues on the board, I'm on the warpath about ending low performance in schools, and I also would like to do something about the infrastructure.
Thank you very much. More than 80% of the city's students are children of color from poor and immigrant families. But their dreams and aspirations are the same as the generations of poor white immigrants that preceded them. They too are entitled to receive a first-rate education to prepare for a productive future. Yet the public school system is failing its primary mission, to educate the next generation. And without a well-trained next generation, the city itself has no future. This is David R. Jones. Thank you for joining me on the Urban Agenda.
To comment on the Urban Agenda or for more information on CSS, contact Community Service Society of New York, 105 East 22nd Street, New York, New York, 10010. Area code 212-254-8900.